last weekend we had the mailbag edition for August for the spirit world, and we had a bunch of questions that came in during the show and then afterwards for the next couple days. And so I gathered them up, and Keith and I thought it would be really wise to take this Monday, since Monsignor was off this week and he'll be back next week, to just go over the basic questions about what you do, Adam, because we mention it all the time. We always say Adam's in exorcism work. Adam does this work every single week. And people are like, well, what exactly is this work? So let's start at the beginning, Adam. Maybe tell us a little bit about what you do on a weekly basis in the exorcism world, why you are part of that, who's part of it, and then I've got a bunch of questions, and then Keith will join us in a little bit, and he's got some more questions to ask you.
Okay. Well, the short version of it is I'm coming up on 20 years of being involved in the world of solemn exorcism here in the States. And for the last 5 or 6 years, maybe internationally. So doing some training in the Far East and South America, mainly the Caribbean. So I'm a lay person. I'm not a priest. I'm not an exorcist. But I came along and Jesus drew me into this at a time when there was very few exorcists in the United States. We don't know exactly how many because there was no master list. There still isn't. But there might have been around 20 for the entire country. And so I got to know a lot of the key people that were involved in this work at that time. And God just drew me into it. And I had a knack for teaching. I had been at so many exorcisms that I had a feel for how the ministry worked. And, starting as early as 2006, I was asked to start speaking at, these private meetings we had. They're not meetings for the public. They're not public conferences, but kind of trainings. And the snowball has just kept rolling, Deb. I thought that God would kind of be done with me once we had trained up a few hundred exorcists in the country, but he isn't, and that's fine. I'm happy to keep serving. So on a weekly basis, every Friday we have sessions here in our diocese. Recently we're doing 4 every Friday. We also have priests sit in with us for training. So, we'll often have multiple exorcists at the sessions, and that's all with approval of their bishop and our bishop, and everything's done correctly. It's an interesting world. The big problem with it is that the public gets snippets of it and then thinks they understand the whole thing. That's number one. Number two, the bigger problem is people get an unhealthy fascination for exorcism, and so they start building their prayer life around feeling defensive and scared of the demons as opposed to joyfully trusting in Christ.
Right. Well, we heard the word of the day, being perfect, and so of course, that was a bit shocking, that we have to be absolutely perfect. Although some biblical scholars say that also it means to be truly authentic, to really come from the heart, to be genuine. And so that I lean towards that a little bit more, Adam, than the perfect part. But let's talk about this. So it's the work that you do is in the Diocese of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. What happens if somebody in Arizona, like Keith and I are in Arizona, what happens if somebody in the Diocese of Phoenix has a problem with some kind of demonic activity around them or something, and should they go to their diocese? And or do you just take care of your own? How do you refer out? Do you have an intake process? What's to give us kind of the scoop on how somebody even inquires about it?
Yeah, so the church is organized by dioceses around the world, and each diocese is run by a diocesan bishop. There might be an administrator if they're between bishops, but it's that bishop's kind of authority over his territory. So if you live in a different diocese than ours, you have to contact your diocese. We don't have the power to, tell your diocese what to do or tell the priests in your diocese what to do. We work in our own territory. The only time that we consult on cases in other dioceses is if, that bishop asks and our bishop okays it. Then we may consult on things, usually things that are physically close to our diocese. But we need to be super clear on this. That doesn't guarantee that if you go and ask your bishop's office, hey, can I ask Pittsburgh for help? That doesn't guarantee that we'll be able to help. Everybody's extremely busy, and increasingly we're crazy busy here. It's not just the 4 cases. We have many other things going. And so there's just not time to take on cases in other dioceses, except in rare, limited circumstances where, it'd be like a briefer consultation.
Right. Okay. So real quickly, just for our brand new listeners or those that are not Catholic, give us the degrees of demonic activity real fast in a quick version.
Yeah, sure. So there's demonic infestation, which is where the demons have the right to do extraordinary things in a place, usually a home or a building. There is demonic oppression or obsession, depending on how you translate obsessio. But the bottom line there is it's an extraordinary attack on a person that they have to gain, the right to do that beyond temptation, the ordinary's temptation. And then there's possession, which everybody knows about, and that's when they gain the right to actually take over what Thomas Aquinas defines as the lower faculties, which is the body and the emotions. They can never touch the free will.
You can't touch the soul, correct?
Right, the soul is God's.
Okay. So when you get disturbances in a family, like a husband and wife are kind of fighting a lot and things like that, and somebody calls in and says, "I think my husband is possessed," that's just not accurate, right?
Well, I mean, there's a slim chance it's accurate, of course, but this is an incredibly rare phenomenon. We get this all the time. So the biggest misunderstanding is mental illness. So, this person's acting strange. I think they're possessed. That's, about 80% of the phone calls and intakes we do, it's misunderstood mental illness or a medical problem.
Right.
And then, there's people that say like, well, my teenager is acting mean, or, their personality is changing. They must be possessed. And again, almost always that's not the case. And when I say rare, like you're talking about 1 or 2 new cases in an entire year in a major city. So this is not something that's happening left and right. And you have to be really careful about, jumping to the conclusion it's spiritual. That's the big error we make. And that's just it's an error in human thinking where we kind of jump to the hypothesis that it's spiritual before ruling out mental illness and medical problems. That's a big mistake because you can leave something untreated because you've jumped to the conclusion it's spiritual.
Right. Okay, so here are some of the questions that came in over the weekend, and I just wanted to ask them. I know we're getting back to the basics, folks, but we have new listeners each and every time we do the show. The show is just growing across the country, so that is wonderful, and we're so grateful to God. So, Adam, couple things. So, you're in the room or the church. So each week when you have the sessions, they're at a church or a chapel or something of that nature, correct?
Yeah, that's the preferred place. Is some place where the Eucharist is reserved. It stays reserved in the tabernacle, but yes, it would be a chapel or a church, unless there was some extraordinary reason that it had to be somewhere else.
Okay. How many people are in the room? That was the next question.
That depends on the team in that diocese, but I would say at least 1 exorcist, at least 1 assistant to take the physical attack so the exorcist can focus on praying. And then I would say at the minimum 1 witness, usually a woman who is praying the rosary and is witnessing everything, so nobody's ever alone with the possessed person. But in most cases, you're talking exorcist, second exorcist, either from that diocese or visiting, 2 witnesses and 2 assistants, so maybe 6 people.
How does the session start? Does it start with prayer? Like how do you know when the session starts?
Well, I mean, really, the session starts sitting down and talking with the person about how their week's been. Because exorcism is a pastoral process of working with a human being. That's another error people get from Hollywood, where it's only about the priest confronting the demon. You're trying to work in love and charity for a suffering human being here. So really, the first little while, you're just talking with the person about their week, what their struggles have been, if they've been particularly attacked that week by the demonic, or they fall into something and they want to go to confession, that type of thing. So really it starts in a more pastoral way, but the actual exorcism rite starts with the litany of the saints.
Oh, wow. It starts with the litany of the saints.
Hmm.
So when that is expressed, does the possessed individual, do they start to get very uncomfortable with that?
Yeah, so the Litany of the Saints is a beautiful ancient prayer of the church that is a prelude to a number of things in the church, or at least historically it was. It's used a little bit less now. And what it does is it calls, the saints to pray for us and support us from
Mm-hmm.
heaven. They
Mm-hmm.
are the church triumphant. But it also serves to agitate the demon enough to come forward so that when the exorcism starts, the demon's already come forward. And what I mean by that is it's taken over the body. So, it's present and speaking, and, can be interrogated at the moments that
Mm-hmm.
that is called for in the rite. But basically, it kind of gets them on deck so that the priest can start the exorcism against that specific demon.
Okay. We just have a couple minutes for this first segment, and we'll send it to Keith for some announcements, and he'll send it back to us. But I have more questions, and actually, folks are they're not exactly. I mean, they're curious in a good way. They just want to know what it entails, because honestly, you're right, Adam. What we're seeing on social media and in the movies, it's all this, dramatic, really gory, vivid images and all these things. And it's like, wow, is that really what Adam goes through every single week? And so, whatever you can share with us, I think it helps us when we're, deciding what to take in as we're viewing things, because there's a lot of new movies coming out. And then let's even talk about the fact I brought this up several times that in September, Beetlejuice is coming out again with a new version, and everybody goes, well, that's just comedy, that's just fun, that's just entertainment. Let's really talk about that as well, because it isn't, and we really need to be careful what we take in and what we view, because those images stay with us. So let's go back to what happens on a weekly basis with these possessed individuals in the solemn rite of exorcism. So this main exorcist priest, what does he? One of the questions was, what does he have with him by way of sacramentals and prayer books and things like that?
Yeah, so the things that are required is a purple stole, and the stole represents priestly authority. Secondly, a crucifix. And third is the actual rite of exorcism, the book that has the exorcism rite in it. Those are required. I would say 100% of the time you also have holy water at hand. And then everyone I know also has first class relics on hand. So whatever's available locally. So we have a big advantage where we have, dozens. We have about 5,000, but we keep about 2 or 3 dozen out and at hand. So, yeah, so what's required: the stole, the crucifix, the rite, the actual book, and then everybody has holy water and relics.
When you said that there's an exorcist there present and then an assistant, are you the assistant slash coach?
Well, so there's always one exorcist. Ideally, there's a second one,
Okay.
and that's either a trainee or a diocese might have two. I always advise bishops, if you're going to appoint somebody, they tend to appoint somebody quite mature that they know well, which is good. But it's good to appoint somebody young who can be learning over the years, and then when the older exorcist retires, you're not starting from zero. So
Mm-hmm.
there's often two. There's what's called a stable assistant. It's not an official title, but in reality, you know, every exorcist team has kind of a stable assistant that often kind of organizes things, takes the phone calls, makes the phone calls, might do the intake interviews, and then they're also at the sessions. And so that person is gently keeping the possessed person from hurting themselves or hurting anybody else, of course, with that person's permission. And you're just using minimal strength because, you have to understand that it's very regular that this is violent. So we're being attacked. We're being punched, kicked, bit, scratched, kicking at the knees, the arch of the foot to break the bones in the foot, biting, just all kinds of physical attacks, choking. And so somebody needs to be there to essentially, gently restrain the person and take that abuse so that the priest can continue to focus on his prayers. Because otherwise, they'll try to pull the stole off. They'll try to knock the book out of their hand. They'll try to desecrate, the crucifix or relics, that type of thing. Typical what you would expect.
Yeah, yeah. And this question just came in. Is there a difference between holy water, epiphany water, and exorcised water? Is there a specific type used during exorcisms?
No, there is no specific type. This is kind of, it's a bit of a misunderstanding that I see that's common, and people will say like exorcised water. That's not a specific thing. It's just that in the older Book of Blessings, anytime anything is blessed, I would say almost always, you could probably find an exception, but almost always it would be exorcised first, not because you assume that it's cursed or there's a demon in that object or with it, but the assumption was that original sin tainted all of creation. And so before something was blessed, you would exorcise it in the same sense that a baby is exorcised at a baptism. You're not saying that the baby has the devil in them. You're saying that the taint of original sin, we're born into that, and so it is to push out the kingdom of darkness that tainted the world with original sin. So there's different types of exorcism. There's that type of exorcism versus the solemn, which is meant for when there's a problem, with a demon there. Mm-hmm. And so when people say exorcised water, they really just mean the old version of blessing water. But no, there's no specific type that's used more than others. You got to remember, and this is super critical, this isn't magic, and it is prayer. So the effect of sacramentals is in proportion to the faith with which they are used. It's not about, these words are said over this, and therefore it's more powerful than that. It's the faith with which you use them determines the grace that flows through them to a large extent. Now, God can do whatever he wants, right? It's not that we're limiting or controlling how much God moves, but when prayer is sincere, it gets a larger reaction. And when his prayer is, what they would say in the kind of mystical world from the heart, even the demons acknowledge that and say that they must, that Jesus is responding and they're going to basically get out now because people are praying in a sincere way. So again, right. You don't want to get caught up in, this water's better than that water. It's to improve your faith with which you use it.
Well, that's why you've said many times during the spirit world, it even with first-class relics compared to third-class relics, because some people will say, well, I don't have a first-class relic, it's not as powerful. And you've stressed that. It has to do with the faith, the prayers of the heart. It has to do with the intention. So it's not like, I have a more powerful item here that's going to work better, correct?
Right, because you're talking about the living church triumphant. We've had many situations where a person has a relationship with the saint, the human being that is possessed has a strong relationship with the saint. And during the session, the demon will complain that Saint so-and-so is here and they're praying for this person. They're making this hard for me, the demon will say, even if there's no relic of that saint present. It's not like the relics determine which saints can pray for you or whether they'll intervene. Again, it's more about your personal relationship with heaven in terms of that saint speaks to you and you've developed that relationship.
That is fascinating. So we really do make friends with those that are in heaven, the church triumphant. I love that. Okay, so you also talked about that you felt, Adam, and you've said this many times on the spirit world, that the rosary is the best deliverance prayer. How do you come to that conclusion?
Well, just it's an empirical thing for me. So again, let's go back to our theme here. It's the sincerity of your prayer and your trust in Jesus that's critical. It's not magic. It's not like, I found this ancient prayer by Saint so-and-so, and this is magically going to make my problem go away now. It's the faith with which you pray these things. Now, in my experience, having tried many different prayers, the rosary has been the most effective all the way up to and including dealing with Satan himself. And I went down that road in my thinking because I saw that the Blessed Mother is an object of absolute terror for the demons. They testified many times that they cannot touch her. They never could touch her. She defeats them utterly. We know from the Bible that she steps on the head of the serpent. She's just a central figure. And I've also seen that almost always the final demon in a case, when a person's going to be utterly, completely freed, the person experiences Mary coming and delivering that message from Jesus that it's over. And typically she simply says, it's over. And the person gets the gift of seeing her enter the room and deliver that message. So, yeah, those are the reasons. And I have found over the years that it, for me, has been the most effective prayer to go to.
So, Keith, we're going to be fighting for the microphone. Do you want to go first? I have more questions are coming in as we speak. So
I say we field the questions that are coming in as we talk.
Yeah, Adam, there's so have you gotten beaten up? That people want to know.
Oh, yeah.
How badly?
Well, I mean, the worst case was, the actual Satan, and there was a number of reasons. I'm confident it was actually him. Jesus limits these creatures for sure. So if they weren't limited by him decreeing how much strength they can use, they would, overpower us. Our bodies are limited in strength, but what they can produce out of a human body is beyond what we can. But I would say the worst was a frozen shoulder for about 6 months from the arm being wrenched that hard. But I normally come out of there bruised, scraped, gouges from fingernails. I'm pretty good at avoiding the biting.
Wow.
Tired, choked, taken to the floor and choked a number of times. But again, in the midst of it, you're praying and you're trusting in Jesus, and you're doing what you can, obviously, to stay safe. But you never come out of there seriously damaged. At least I never have, and I've never had a broken bone or anything like that. So you're just kind of tussling. It's
Right.
really not that bad.
Because of your trust in Jesus, you're constantly practicing that and thinking of that, correct?
Yeah, and even if they get really, I guess it's not an ego thing. I'm not important, but they really don't like me. So even in the midst of, like, if they really get ticked and get you by the throat, even in the midst of that, still praying, and gently holding a relic on their head, that type of thing. You don't want to lose your trust in Jesus in terms of knowing he's sovereign, he's over all of this. And like, even in those moments when it's gotten pretty violent like that, afterwards, when the session's over and the person's back to their human state and everything normal, I remember a few weeks ago, they're like, oh, I'm so sorry about you being choked today, but I knew when it was happening that you would be fine. I knew I could feel from God everything would be all right. So the people have this strange experience that they're in their body, but they can't control it. And so they're experiencing their body doing all these horrible things and saying all these horrible things. So for them, they often feel really badly afterwards, even though they didn't do it. You can imagine it's kind of confusing because it's your own hands, on this person. But honestly, it's not that big of a deal. Over the years, I've gotten so used to it that I know Jesus protects us. And so I just keep praying, and everything settles down. Now, of course, the exorcist, when they do that kind of thing and kind of overwhelm you, the exorcist is saying, in the name of Jesus, stop, get back in the chair, basic, stop doing whatever they're doing. The exorcist is ordering them, and they do have to obey that.
So Timoteo just sent this in on the live chat on YouTube. And Adam, please wave to everybody. The chat's going strong this morning. And Keith, too. Keith's with us for this segment. Timoteo asked, is exorcism a component of spiritual warfare? And can one be involved in spiritual warfare without participation in exorcisms?
Oh, my gosh, of course. Exorcism is one specific rite of the church developed for a very specific problem of possession. Spiritual warfare, the Christian is involved in spiritual warfare every moment of their life, from cradle to grave. Now, of course, when you attain reason, which is typically at about 7, and you start having responsibility for your choices in terms of sinning before God, you've entered a deeper state of spiritual warfare. But the enemy is tempting us to mortal sin our entire lives. That's the spiritual warfare that we need to be worried about. You know, going to the exorcisms, you're just doing your role within a rite of the church. Yes, it's spiritual warfare in a very physical, real sense, but the more important thing, Deb, is whether I make it to heaven or not. The more important thing is whether I'm falling to mortal sin in between the exorcisms. That's what's going to send me to hell. I'm not concerned about rolling around on the carpet with the devil. That's, number one, he doesn't want to kill us. He wants us damned. So I know Jesus wouldn't let him, and number two, he doesn't want to. So honestly, I couldn't really care much about that. I mean, I don't like being bruised up and scraped, but who cares? What I care about is making it to heaven. So spiritual warfare is your struggle with temptation. That's the primary spiritual warfare.
Mm-hmm. Great question, Tim. Keep those questions coming in. I know Keith's got some, and we got to move quickly. But Adam, this is kind of an off-the-wall question. But why is it? You mentioned that the demons can kind of mess with technology. I've also heard that they can mess with plumbing. They like to mess around with water. Why is it that every time we talk about the basics of the work that you do and getting back to the fundamentals of things, every time there's either like some strange thing that happens, it's odd. Like, for instance, as you were talking, I was completely fine, and all of a sudden, I had this urge to sneeze, and then it was nonstop, and then to be able to speak, you have to kind of cough a little bit. Do they have an impact on that? Because that is the oddest thing. Every time I ever talk to you about it, it's like something weird like that happens.
I mean, it's, of course, we can't say for sure when it comes to stuff like that, but with technology, it's so common in the exorcism community that, cell phones will fail, strange noises will come across. Earlier in our conversation here, I don't know if you guys heard it, but I heard weird...
I did too.
Weird kind of distortion coming across. That's so common in the exorcism community that we just laugh and shrug it off because, for whatever reason, they are good at messing with electronics. It's just so prevalent, including like cars stopping and not operating, and the exorcist having to pray and then the car starts normally when they're on the way to a case, all kinds of stuff like that. They have mentioned these radio shows during the sessions. They've complained about my books. They've complained about the radio shows, and in a mocking way, of course. They say like, "Oh, nobody's going to believe you. People don't believe in us. You're not going to do such and such." And then in other sessions, they'll complain, "You're telling too many people about my friends. We have to find a way to stop you." So they're well aware of the media work. Yeah.
Right. So basically, they're always trying to mess with us to get us off focus, to get us distracted or get us frustrated. So our goal and what we should be focusing on and our intention should be to stay clear of what our mission is, to stay focused on God and not let these things take us off the mark, or take us off the pace of things. Because I do find that you can get discouraged easily, especially in ministry, Adam, when things start to unravel. You can just throw your hands up and say, "Okay, I'm going back to bed and starting this day over again because this is not working." And that's exactly what they want, right, Adam? And we are called as Christians to kind of soldier up a bit.
Well, and to go back to the theme from earlier this morning, we shouldn't think about these things in terms of, "Oh, the demon's doing such and such and discouraging me." Think about it in terms of Jesus is allowing this testing for his own reasons. He knows more than I do. He's allowing them to try to discourage me. Ultimately, he allows periods of testing for us that we come out of those periods of testing stronger, where we learn lessons from them. So it's a chance to persevere in your trust in Christ and keep your focus on him, as opposed to getting fearful and saying like, "Oh, things are going bad in my life. The demons are tormenting me." Think about it in terms of, this is God's providence. It's not that he wants us to suffer, from these creatures. But when we're entering into ministry, he allows a certain amount of testing. You can ask any priest whether when they were in seminary if they experienced a certain amount of testing to discourage them. Every single one will tell you they did. So the focus should be on, okay, Lord, what do you want me to learn from this trial? And then persevere, learn that lesson, and basically everything I've ever seen, he then ends that trial.
Okay, I hope folks were listening, because there's the golden nugget right there, what you just shared with all of us, Adam. So Keith, I'll let you ask the next questions, because I think I'm pretty much done for this morning, but I know you have some.
Yeah, so Adam, you mentioned earlier that you have first-class relics on hand during a session. What's the decision-making process, especially when you have so many at your fingertips? Like, is there one that you go to more than often? Does it depend on the particular session? What is that like?
So 2 levels of that, Keith. Number one, my go-to basic that's universally applicable is a relic of the True Cross. So that is always helpful. And then the next issue is it's a particular spirit that you're dealing with. So if a spirit, and we know a lot of their names and what they do, and, either biblically what they were associated with, or from cases we know what they do. So let's take a spirit's particular knack, what the kind of sin it inspires or the kind of attacks it does. You pick a saint that opposes that. So, let's say it's, an attack of a particular type, and there was a saint that dealt with that trial in life and defeated it and made it to heaven. You go and grab that saint that has a virtue that opposes the vice of that particular spirit. And they will say sometimes, I hate Saint so-and-so, I tried to stop them, I tried to defeat them. We had one a few weeks back now that was complaining about Gemma Galgani, that it had tried to torment her in life. And so, of course, we brought her relic and applied it, and it caused the demon tremendous pain and wanting to leave, and asking for Gemma's prayers, of course. So that's part of it. And then the second thing is sometimes I'll grab a group relic with a ton of saints in it and just use that when we're not sure of the particular vice that we're dealing with.